Welcome to Talk Travel with Heather Tate, North Mississippi's podcast for savvy travelers. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is a weekly podcast that airs every Monday on the Shark 102.3 FM radio station based in Ripley, Mississippi, and is then released as a podcast. Travel advisor and travel enthusiast Heather Tate of Whimsical Destinations gives listeners expert travel tips curated through the years of personal and professional experience. By clicking subscribe, you'll have a new travel tip to add to your collection delivered to your podcast library every Monday. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is brought to you by Sun Bear Studio. Sun Bear Studio is a boutique recording studio in the heart of Ripley, Mississippi. When you record with us at Sun Bear Studio, we can mix, master, register, and publish your music, your podcast, or your family story. Email us when you're ready at sunbear@jc.media.
This program was recorded at Sun Bear Studio in Ripley, Mississippi.
Good morning, Northeast Mississippi travelers. This is Heather with Talk Travel with Heather Tate, and I am so excited to share my adventures and tried and true tips with you. Whether you are also a seasoned traveler, a hopeful traveler, or currently an armchair traveler, meaning you're going to follow along with us from home for now. This is our 198th episode of Talk Travel with Heather Tate, and this week we're going to talk about airlines in crisis and how you can keep your wings from being clipped, especially this summer. Now, there's been lots of negative air travel chatter, and I know I'm in the biz, so I hear it more than most. I'm always hearing about flight delays and cancellations and soaring flight prices. And I will say this is something I hear now on the regular, not just this summer. So because I hear this very often and because I deal with airlines and the hoops we have to jump through for air travel on a daily basis, I wanted to just lay out some of the issues for you so we can discuss them and see how they really can impact you. And should you be worried or not, and what you can do to try to counterbalance the rising prices. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, it just feels like we got over the TSA scare from the government shutdown, a very lengthy shutdown where the TSA agents were delayed on getting their paychecks. So there were longer lines, like record lines in the airports. You had some people were getting there hours early and still missing their flights. And it was a big deal. Memphis was impacted. Birmingham was impacted. I know Atlanta was definitely impacted, which is one of my favorite airports to actually fly out of. So it was an issue. Now it seems like that is better right now. It is. So what are some other issues that are happening? Well, now we have jet fuel cost soaring with the uncertainty in the Middle East. I know it's a back and forth every day. Have we reached an agreement? Have we not reached an agreement? Will we be able to get fuel through? Will we not? Who is this going to impact? How is it going to impact the American carriers and the European carriers? And even if it's an American carrier, you still got to come back from Europe. So how is it going to impact overall? Well, prices have increased. Do they increase every summer? Yes, I've seen that across the board. It seems like flights have increased every summer for the past several years, at least. So that part's not unusual. But one thing that seems to be unusual is that there are flights, certain routes that are already being canceled. Some European carriers especially have already canceled some flights this summer, getting ahead of that. They know that the availability is going to be decreasing and the cost is going to be increasing. Now, what about our American carriers? Well, we know, if you've watched the news at all, that Spirit Airlines recently shut down as of Saturday, May the 2nd, making it the largest U.S. airline collapse in a generation. 34 years in business. And I remember talking to my client just a few weeks ago who was planning on flying Spirit to Orlando. And, they were thinking that, it was possible in the 11th hour there was going to be a bailout and that we'd wake up Saturday morning and it would be business as usual. That did not happen. And as soon as we woke up, we saw anyone that was going to be flying Spirit that day was not going to have a flight that unless they changed carriers. And the industry response, I feel like, was very strong. JetBlue was ready and in reclaiming its place in Fort Lauderdale, where it once had a much stronger presence than Spirit. I believe had about 0.25% of the space in Fort Lauderdale, but it was ready. Other airlines were also ready, including JetBlue, and they offered emergency fares for not only that Saturday and that weekend, but I believe even 4 and 5 days into the next week, where they were capping the fares. Because as you know, if you're buying a flight same day, those prices are always going to be significantly higher, 4 or 5 times the amount. So they capped the fares so people could still get to where they needed to be, whether it was home, on business, or on their trip, whatever their travel reasons were, so they would not be stranded when they were arriving at the airport. I also saw where there was a captain who was going to be flying his last flight before retirement. And he wasn't going to be able to do it. And another airline, I believe it was Southwest, I would like to say it was Southwest, stepped in and invited him to still fly his last flight. So there's some camaraderie there, that even though these airlines are competing, right, for passengers, and so they oftentimes are, it seems like they're pitting against each other. When it comes down to it, if one fails, they're all affected. If one thrives, they're all affected. So they came together. And there are a lot of airline workers, employees for years who are affected. Those who had, seniority, those who are loyal guests who had miles and points with the airline. A lot of people were affected. And so what is recommended if you had a flight this month or throughout the summer with Spirit, the sooner you rebook, the better. So the time is of the essence. If it is somewhere that maybe you were thinking, okay, we could drive, it was a shorter flight, you might want to consider driving it instead. My clients were able to change airlines. They're now going to fly Southwest, because there are other airlines that are going to go to Orlando from here. So they had to check to see which ones were going to be similar in price. Now, speaking of price, airports that had a lot of flights with Spirit, they might notice more of an increase in their fares overall, because if Spirit tried to keep, their prices a certain amount, it was going to make other airlines keep theirs a certain amount. So be watching for that, especially if you're flying out of an area that had a lot of Spirit flights, you might see an increase across the board. What are some other impacts besides Spirit, closing? What are some other impacts? As of May 19th, Delta will eliminate drinks and snacks except for first class. So Delta first class will not be impacted with this. They're going to eliminate drinks and snacks on flights shorter than 350 miles. Basically, that means if you're going to be in the air less than an hour. They're saying they're doing this for more consistency, not so much as in response for soaring jet prices. Tomato. You can say what you want. Is that an impact from the jet fuel? Or meaning consistency is, if you start off with a service and it's only a 35-minute flight, are you able to get to everyone by the time everyone else should be finished and putting up their tray tables? I can see the point. I'm not arguing that when you have really short flights, it is a struggle for consistency. And I'll also admit, when I have a short flight, whether it's from, for example, Birmingham to Atlanta or Memphis to Atlanta, that by the time you get up in the air and you get your drink and a snack, your flight is over. And if you were in the back row, you might have had your drink for a couple of minutes before it's time to put it up. Or they might not be able to get to you at all, especially if there's turbulence or any chance of turbulence, right? That it'll be suspended. So I can see that is a reason, but I don't think that necessarily is the only reason. All right, what else? All major U.S. carriers are increasing the price of checked baggage fees, now starting at $45 instead of $35. That was the lowest price for some of them. They've already increased $10. So if you have a family of 4 and you are planning on each bringing a checked bag, you're looking at $200 each way, for checked bags. So what can you do in the face of rising prices, less amenities? For one, I would say, once you are getting on a plane, you can have your own drink. Once you're through security, you could get a bottle of water, a Coke, a snack, and take it on the plane with you, right? That's something that you could do. If you're like, well, I'm going to have this, 35-minute flight. I can't imagine not being able to have any water with me. Bring it on with you. Right? Have a big bottle of water that you can, since you're through security, even when you get to your connection and you get on your next flight, you can still have that same bottle of water as long as you're not leaving through security and have to re-enter. So, that's something that you can do as far as having a drink and snack with you. Like a lot of people already do that anyways. But what about price? How do you navigate this? Okay, before we want to talk about that, I do have something positive I want to share. And that is, if you've been concerned about passports and getting your passport renewed or applying for the first time because you're thinking, well, how is everything, interacting together? Is this impacting everything that's happening, impacting that? As of now, my clients have still been receiving their passports back in like record times. I had clients just the other day. They got theirs back from start to finish in 2 weeks. My 9-year-old son, Christian, got his passport renewal, so it's his 3rd passport. He got it back in 13 days. And this was not expedited. This was just general processing, but it was like doing another one from start to finish when you have a child passport. So it didn't even really count as a renewal. It was like getting a new passport in 13 days. So some things I recommend, if you don't already have a passport and you're wanting to travel this year, go ahead. We never know when this can change. Right? This is a very fluid situation. That's the thing with air travel in general and travel in general. It's constantly evolving. So right now, if it looks like passport times are good, don't wait till the fall. We don't know what it's going to look like in the fall. Don't wait till Christmas. We sure don't know what it's going to look like at Christmas trying to get a passport back. So the sooner the better. And so speaking of the sooner the better, that's how you want to book your flights. The sooner, the better. At least start tracking them. Maybe you're not ready to book them yet. Maybe you're waiting to have your passport in hand, which I do recommend when booking flights. So there are price checker features like on Google Flights, Kayak. I even check Flight Hopper. Even in Expedia, it will give you an idea of saying, okay, we predict flights are going to, increase in the next week and not go back down until after your travel. Again, these, predictions, but they can kind of help you decide, do I need to book now? But I'll just tell you, without having a crystal ball, if you're wanting to travel this summer, sooner than later. The closer you get to the time, there will be less flight options and the prices are going to increase. There'll be less seats available on the flight you want to take, especially if you're talking about multiple people, families of 4, 5, a group of 6, 8, 10 people. The sooner the better. If you can drive, you might want to consider driving. And I'm only saying that because if it's what would normally be a very short, convenient flight, but it's only a 4-hour drive or a 6-hour drive, I'm telling you, when I go to Orlando, I usually drive. We usually drive, not fly. Now, I understand if you're traveling solo and you don't want to fly or you don't want to drive long periods of time by yourself. I understand that. But if you're going with a family, you have a family of 4 or more, you may want to consider driving instead of flying. Okay, so book early, price check to see when the best time to book your flights can be. Sometimes it's less on a Tuesday to book your flights than it would be on the weekend. It's going to be more usually on a holiday. So Memorial Day weekend, I do not recommend booking flights that weekend, not even just for travel that weekend, but just booking your flights for future travel. Same with 4th of July week. That's not when I would be booking my flights because when people are off work and they're in the holiday mood, that's when prices tend to go up even more for booking. What about having a credit card? Now, some people do not like having credit cards. They're against it, and I understand that, but I'm going to make this point. We have a credit card that we use solely to be able to have miles and points. And because of that, we don't want to be charged interest either. So whatever we put on that card that month, we pay off by the end of the month. So we do not incur any interest fees. So we're basically just putting it on the card and then paying it off. And because of that, I have a free flight when we go to Hawaii this summer. As I said, flights are high. So when you have a family of 4 traveling, knocking that down a flight to where we're only paying for 3 really helps. So sometimes you've got points and benefits on the table that you're not considering. Maybe you don't want to have access to that credit card only for travel purposes. The other thing is, we talked about the baggage fees. Like, we have no baggage fees for any of our checked bags with Delta because of our card status. That's something to consider. The other thing is, consider just doing carry-on. I plan to take carry-on only, where I have a carry-on and a backpack, so I book main cabin, so I can do that. I plan to do that as much as possible. So even if I'm not flying Delta, where I would have my baggage fees covered, that then I'm taking less because I really need less than what I used to pack, if I'm honest. And I have entire episodes all about packing in carry-on. And if you think you can't do it, you can, especially if you're going tropical. Now, I will say I have not had as much experience cold weather. I'm going to try to do carry-on only for when we do our Alma Waterways cruise later this fall, when the temperatures are going to be much cooler than what I'm used to in the Caribbean. So I'm going to try. I have clients going to Alaska this summer, and some of them are planning on doing carry-on only. Some are going to be checking bags because you do need more when it's going to be cold weather. Like, your cold weather clothes take up more room. I understand, but I still think there's a way to do that carry on if you're willing to consider that. Other thing, be flexible. And I mean that to say this. I have a couple that's flying to St. Lucia this summer. I actually have a lot of couples and families flying to St. Lucia. St. Lucia is known for its high flight prices in comparison to other islands like Jamaica and the Bahamas. Anyways, St. Lucia is higher. There's just less flights that go there a day, which means less carriers are there, which all these things are going to impact the flight prices. Well, I had clients who were going in June. Their flights were going to be $2,000 a person, which is really high even for St. Lucia. But I asked if they had some flexibility. We already checked the option of you can look at multiple airports, and I do recommend that. So maybe Memphis is your home airport. Look at Birmingham. Look at Nashville. Look at Atlanta. Look at New Orleans. Compare multiple airports, because it can change per day, per flight, which airport has the better fare. But I also asked them, I was like, do you have any flexibility in your schedule for your trip? And they did. They could move it around some days. So we adjusted it by 3 days. That's it. Just 3 days. They were arriving 3 days early, and the flights were cut in half. Same flights on Delta. Instead of $2,000 a person, they were $1,000 per person. So that made it a 2-for-1, right? $1,000 per person in the summer for St. Lucia is a good day on Delta. It is, just by adjusting their flights a few days. So if you already have your flights looked in, or your dates locked in for where you're staying, see if you can be flexible on adjusting that to maybe get a better flight price. Well, the other thing is, book your flights first. Book your flights, then look for where you're going to stay. That's another way to help, navigate these high flights. Be willing to overnight in airports. That's not fun, right? And I don't mean stay overnight in the airport, staying nearby. I fly down to Miami quite often. And instead of trying to do the early flight the next morning, where I'm going to have a short layover, 45 minutes or an hour is really not long enough for a connection in Miami, unless everything goes perfectly. So what I like to do then is I like to take the evening flight from Memphis or Birmingham, get down there by 9 o'clock at night, have dinner, check into a hotel, and then I will be ready to fly nonstop to wherever I wanted to go in the Caribbean that next morning. And I'll have a short flight that day. It'll be nonstop. Don't have to worry about connections. And oftentimes I saved hundreds on my flight that way. Another thing you can do is fly in a day early to the islands you're wanting to go to. Maybe you're like, okay, I'm already locked in. These are the dates I'm going to the resort. The resort doesn't have any other availability. I can't adjust that booking. But if I flew in a day earlier, I'd save overall $1,000. Guess what? You can oftentimes stay nearby the resort where you're going to check in for way less than $1,000. And you got a whole extra day where then you can move over to your resort first thing the next morning. Maybe you had a $200 hotel. Maybe you stayed in an Airbnb, depending on where you're traveling. I'd recommend maybe some hotels over Airbnbs, but it just depends, right? But you could do that, save money, and get an extra day. These are all things to consider. Now, that's all the time we have for this week's episode. As you can tell, I am passionate about flights and helping you save money on flights so you don't have to clip your wings this summer. You just have to be smarter as you fly. Happy traveling.
This show is made possible by JC Media, LLC in Ripley, Mississippi. JC Media owns the Shark 102.3 Classic Rock FM radio station where the show is hosted. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app or stream episodes online at shark1023.com/podcasts. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That email is theshark1023@gmail.com.